He had exactly 17 minutes to kill her brother. The rifle was assembled, the scope calibrated, the wind speed calculated at 6 miles per hour from the northeast. From his position on the rooftop of an abandoned textile factory in the Bronx, Elias Vance could see directly into the fourth-floor apartment where his target was supposed to arrive at precisely 10:15 p.m. It was Wednesday, March 12. The temperature was 42 degrees. His hands were steady because they were always steady. In 11 years of doing this work, he had never missed a shot, never hesitated, never felt anything except the cold satisfaction of a job completed. But at 10:07 p.m., 8 minutes before his target was scheduled to walk through that door, someone else walked in first. A woman. Early 20s. Dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing hospital scrubs and carrying a bag of takeout food, and she was laughing at something on her phone with the kind of laugh that made the whole room brighter. She wasn't supposed to be there. The intelligence file said nothing about a sister. And the moment Elias saw her face through his scope, something happened that had never happened before. He hesitated. That hesitation lasted exactly 4 seconds. But in his world, 4 seconds was enough to change everything. Because in those 4 seconds, his target walked in behind her. The man he was paid $300,000 to eliminate was now standing 6 inches from a woman who had no idea she was about to witness her brother's execution. Elias had a clean shot. He could take it. The brother would drop, the sister would scream, and by the time anyone understood what had happened, Elias would be gone. That was the protocol. That was what 11 years of training demanded. But his finger didn't move. He watched through the scope as she hugged her brother, as she unpacked the food, as she sat down across from him at a small kitchen table and started talking with animated gestures about her day. And Elias, for the first time in his career, lowered his weapon. Now here's the question that's going to haunt you for the rest of this story. What happens when a man who has built his entire life around being invisible, being emotionless, being untouchable, suddenly finds the one person who makes him want to be seen? Would you risk everything for a connection you know is doomed from the start? Or would you walk away before the damage becomes permanent? Before I tell you what Elias did next, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like on this video, and leave me a comment telling me what you would do if you fell in love with someone whose family you were hired to destroy. Your answer might reveal more about yourself than you expect. Now let me show you how a hitman with a perfect record fell into the one trap he never saw coming. His name wasn't really Elias Vance. That was the identity he'd been using for the past 3 years, built on a foundation of forged documents, fabricated history, and a trail of digital breadcrumbs that led nowhere. His real name was buried so deep that even he sometimes forgot it. What mattered was the work. He was employed by an organization that didn't have a name, operated out of locations that changed every 6 months, and served clients who paid in cryptocurrency and communicated through encrypted channels that self-destructed after each message. He was their best. He had never failed an assignment. He had never been identified, never been caught, never left evidence. He was a ghost with a bank account and a 1-bedroom apartment in a building where no one knew their neighbors' names. The target that night was Daniel Reyes, 34 years old, a mid-level financial consultant who had made the mistake of embezzling from people who didn't appreciate being stolen from. The contract was straightforward. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. No witnesses. Payment upon confirmation of death. Elias had done jobs like this 100 times. He could do them in his sleep. But he hadn't known about the sister. Her name, he would later learn, was Maya. She was 26 years old. A nurse at Mount Sinai, specializing in pediatric oncology. She spent her days taking care of children with cancer and her evenings taking care of a brother who, according to the file, didn't deserve her. She wasn't married. She lived in a small apartment in Queens. She had a cat named Hemingway and a habit of reading paperback novels on the subway. None of this was in the original intelligence package. Elias found it himself, in the hours after he lowered his rifle, because he needed to understand why her face had made him hesitate. He told himself it was professional curiosity. He told himself he needed to assess whether she was a security risk, whether she knew something about her brother's activities, whether she might interfere with the rescheduled job. He told himself a lot of things that first week. None of them were true. The reconnaissance began on Friday, March 14th. He positioned himself at a coffee shop across the street from Mount Sinai's main entrance, nursing a black coffee and reading a newspaper like every other anonymous commuter in the city. She emerged at 7:23 a.m., still in her scrubs, exhausted from what had clearly been a night shift. Even tired, even with circles under her eyes and her hair escaping its ponytail, she moved with a kind of grace that made people step aside for her without realizing they were doing it. She walked 3 blocks to a different coffee shop, ordered what he would later learn was a vanilla latte with an extra shot, and sat by the window to drink it while staring at nothing in particular. He watched her for 47 minutes. When she finally left, he followed at a distance of half a block until she descended into the subway station and disappeared. That night, he pulled up the contract file and stared at Daniel Reyes's photograph. The resemblance to Maya was unmistakable. Same dark eyes. Same angular jawline. Same slight asymmetry in the smile. Looking at Daniel now felt different than it had before. Before, he was a target. A name. A task to be completed. Now he was her brother. The person who made her laugh when she came home with takeout food. The person she hugged without thinking about it. The person she would mourn. Elias closed the file and didn't open it again for 3 days. The first contact happened on March 19th, a Wednesday. Not by design. At least, that's what Elias told himself. He was at the same coffee shop near Mount Sinai, conducting what he insisted was continued reconnaissance, when the shop suddenly became crowded during the morning rush. Every table was occupied. Maya walked in, ordered her usual vanilla latte, and turned to find nowhere to sit. Her eyes landed on the empty chair across from Elias. She hesitated. He should have looked away. He should have made himself invisible, the way he always did, the way he was trained to do. Instead, he gestured to the chair and said, "It's open." She smiled and sat down. "Thank you. I promise I'll be quiet. I just need 10 minutes to remember how to be a human before I go home." He nodded. She was true to her word, sitting in silence, sipping her drink, staring out the window with the same distant expression he'd seen before. He should have left. He should have finished his coffee and walked away. Instead, after 7 minutes of silence, he heard himself ask, "Long night?" She turned to him, surprised that he'd spoken. Then her expression softened. "The longest. Lost a patient. 12 years old. I thought we had more time." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Elias had seen death more times than he could count, had caused it more times than he cared to remember. But the way she talked about it, like losing a patient was losing a piece of herself, was something he didn't understand. Something he wanted to understand. "I'm sorry," he said. And for the first time in years, he meant it. Their second conversation happened on March 22nd. Same coffee shop. Same table by the window. This time it wasn't an accident. Elias had arrived early, taken the table, and left the chair across from him conspicuously empty. When Maya walked in and saw him, she smiled with recognition and asked if the seat was taken. "Waiting for someone?" she asked as she sat down. "Just finished waiting," he said, and the ease with which the lie came surprised him. They talked for nearly an hour that morning. She told him about her patients, about the small victories that made the losses bearable. He told her about a fictional job in consulting, vague enough to be untraceable, boring enough that she didn't ask follow-up questions. She laughed at a joke he made about spreadsheets. He discovered that her laugh was even better up close than it had been through a rifle scope. When she left, she paused at the door and looked back. "Same time Friday?" she asked. He nodded before he could stop himself. "Same time Friday." The pattern continued through the end of March and into April. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, they met at the coffee shop. The conversations grew longer, deeper, more personal. She told him about her parents' death in a car accident when she was 18. About how she had raised Daniel alone, putting herself through nursing school while keeping him out of trouble. About how she still felt responsible for him, even now, even though he was a grown man who should have been responsible for himself. He's made some bad decisions, she admitted one morning, stirring her latte with a faraway look. Some really bad ones. But he's still my brother. I can't give up on him. Elias said nothing. The contract was still active. The client was growing impatient. He had received 3 messages in the past week, each one more pointed than the last. Delivery expected by end of month. Is there a problem we should know about? Delays incur penalties. He deleted each message without responding. The test came on April 7th. Elias needed to know if Maya had any knowledge of her brother's criminal activities. He needed to know if she was innocent or complicit. If she knew, then his attachment was a liability that could be managed. If she didn't, then the situation was worse than he feared. He engineered a conversation about finances. Casual, indirect, the way he'd been trained. He mentioned an article he'd read about corporate fraud. He watched her reaction carefully. She laughed bitterly. Daniel would know more about that than me. I've been covering his rent for the past 6 months because he's between opportunities. Whatever that means. She didn't know. She had no idea that her brother had stolen $4 million from a cartel-affiliated investment fund. She had no idea that men were looking for him. She had no idea that the brother she was protecting had put a price on his own head. And she had no idea that the man sitting across from her, the man she was starting to trust, was the weapon those men had hired to collect. The near exposure happened on April 12th, a Saturday night. Elias had been conducting surveillance on Daniel's apartment, looking for an opportunity to complete the job without Maya present. He had positioned himself on the fire escape of an adjacent building, using a long-range listening device to monitor conversations inside. What he didn't expect was for Maya to show up unannounced. What he expected even less was for her to step out onto the apartment's balcony, light a cigarette she clearly didn't want anyone to know she smoked, and look directly at the fire escape where he was hidden. She couldn't see him. The shadows were too deep, and his position was carefully chosen. But she stared in his direction for a full 30 seconds, as if she sensed something. Then she spoke, almost to herself. I know something's wrong. I can feel it. She went back inside. Elias didn't move for another hour. When he finally descended, his hands were trembling for the first time in 11 years. On April 15th, the twist came. Elias had been digging deeper into Daniel's background, looking for something, anything, that might change the calculus of the situation. What he found made his blood run cold. Daniel Reyes wasn't just an embezzler. He was a witness. 3 years ago, Daniel had been present at a meeting where the investment fund's true owners, members of a Colombian cartel, had discussed operations in explicit detail. Daniel had recorded that meeting. The recording was his insurance policy, his guarantee that if they ever came for him, he could bring them down too. The people who hired Elias didn't want Daniel dead because he stole their money. They wanted him dead because of what he knew. And if Daniel died, that recording might disappear forever. Or it might fall into the wrong hands. Or it might surface in ways that created chaos across 3 continents. This wasn't a simple contract anymore. This was a time bomb. Elias should have reported the new intelligence to his handlers. He should have let them decide how to proceed. Instead, he made a different choice. On April 17th, he approached Daniel directly. Not as a hitman. As a stranger who happened to know things he shouldn't. The meeting took place in a bar in the financial district, the kind of place where people talked in whispers and paid in cash. Daniel was paranoid, which was smart. But he was also desperate, which made him stupid. I know about the recording, Elias said. I know who's after you. And I know that if you don't disappear in the next 72 hours, you're going to die. Daniel's face went pale. Who are you? Someone who doesn't want to see your sister become collateral damage. The name worked like a key. Daniel's defensiveness crumbled. Maya doesn't know anything. She can't be involved in this. Then help me keep her out of it. Tell me where the recording is. Tell me what you need to vanish. And I'll make sure the people hunting you think you're already dead. It was a dangerous play. If his handlers found out he was negotiating with the target instead of eliminating him, Elias would become a target himself. But watching Maya's face in his mind, hearing her voice talk about the brother she refused to give up on, he couldn't pull the trigger. Not anymore. The arrangement took shape over the next 48 hours. Daniel had the recording stored in a safety deposit box at a bank in Delaware. Elias would retrieve it, deliver it to a journalist contact he'd cultivated years ago as insurance against his own employers, and ensure it reached federal authorities in a way that couldn't be traced back to anyone. In exchange, Daniel would take a new identity that Elias would arrange, leave the country, and never contact anyone from his old life again. Including Maya. That was the part neither of them wanted to say out loud. For Daniel to survive, Maya had to believe he was dead. On April 21st, Elias staged the kill. He used a body from an unrelated incident, arranged the scene to match a robbery gone wrong, and filed a completion report with his handlers that included photographic evidence carefully edited to be convincing but not verifiable. The payment came through within 6 hours. $300,000, deposited into an untraceable account. Elias had been paid to kill a man who was, at that moment, boarding a private plane to Sao Paulo with a new passport and a new name. The lie was complete. And now came the hardest part. He found Maya at the coffee shop on April 23rd. She wasn't sitting by the window. She was standing at the counter, staring at her phone, tears streaming down her face. The news had broken that morning. Local financial consultant found dead in apparent robbery. She looked up when he walked in. The devastation in her eyes nearly broke him. "He's gone," she whispered. "My brother is gone." Elias did the only thing he could. He held her. In the middle of a crowded coffee shop, with strangers brushing past them, he wrapped his arms around a woman whose life he had just shattered and let her cry into his chest. The weeks that followed were the closest thing to normalcy Elias had ever experienced. He became Maya's anchor. He was there when she cleaned out Daniel's apartment. He was there when she identified what she believed was his body. He was there for the funeral, standing in the back, watching her deliver a eulogy for a brother who was alive and well in Brazil. He hated himself more with each passing day. But he couldn't leave. She needed him. And somewhere along the way, he had started needing her too. On May 15th, she told him she loved him. They were on the rooftop of her building in Queens, watching the sunset paint the skyline orange and pink. "I know it's fast," she said. "I know I'm probably a mess right now and this isn't fair to you. But you've been the only thing keeping me together. And I love you. I don't know how else to say it." Elias looked at her face, at the trust in her eyes, at the hope that had somehow survived everything she'd been through. He should have told her the truth. He should have confessed everything and let her decide what to do with the information. Instead, he said, "I love you too." And he meant it. That was the worst part. The unraveling began on June 3rd. Elias received a message from his handlers. Not through the usual encrypted channel, but through a dead drop location he hadn't used in years. The message was short. "We know about Daniel. We know about the girl. Meeting requested. Midnight. Pier 17. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Someone had talked. Someone had found out. And now the same people who paid him to kill were coming for answers. He went to the meeting armed with 2 handguns, a knife, and a desperate hope that this could still be fixed. The men who met him were not the ones he expected. They weren't his handlers. They were worse. They were the cartel's direct representatives. The recording surfaced, one of them said. "A thin man with silver hair and eyes like a shark. Federal prosecutors have it. Our operations are compromised. Our people are being arrested." He stepped closer to Elias. You were supposed to prevent this. You were supposed to eliminate the source. Instead, you helped him disappear. You helped him destroy us." Elias said nothing. There was nothing to say. "The contract is amended," the man continued. "New target. The sister. She may have information. She may have copies. She's a liability now. You have 1 week to complete the job. And this time, we'll be watching." The walk back to Maya's apartment was the longest of his life. She was asleep when he arrived, curled up on her couch with Hemingway the cat purring beside her. He stood in her doorway and watched her breathe. The woman he loved. The woman he had protected by destroying her world. The woman he was now being ordered to kill. He had 1 week to find another solution. 1 week to save her from the consequences of his own choices. 1 week to decide who he really was. On June 5th, he told her everything. Not in the apartment. That wasn't safe anymore. He drove her to a cabin in upstate New York, a property owned through a shell company that no one could trace. And in the living room of that cabin, with the sun setting through dusty windows, he confessed. The hitman. The contract. Her brother's survival. The staged death. The recording. The cartel. Everything. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, processing, her expression shifting through emotions he couldn't read. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. Terrifyingly calm. "You let me mourn him. You held me while I cried for him. And he was alive the whole time. Yes. You were sent to kill him. And you're telling me this now because they've sent you to kill me. Yes. So why tell me at all? Why not just do it?" Elias met her eyes. "Because I would rather die than hurt you. And I need you to understand that before I ask you to trust me one more time." The plan they developed over the next 3 days was insane. It relied on timing, on luck, on the cartel's arrogance. But it was the only option. Maya would become visible. She would appear to be investigating her brother's death, asking questions, making noise. The cartel would see her as a threat and move to eliminate her. But Elias would be waiting. He knew their methods, their patterns, their preferred contractors. He would intercept the hit before it happened and capture evidence that could bring down not just the local operation, but the entire network. It was a trap. Maya was the bait. And Elias was betting everything on his ability to spring it before she got killed. The night of June 9th was cold for early summer. Maya stood on the steps of a courthouse in Lower Manhattan, speaking to reporters about her brother's death and her suspicions about who was really responsible. Elias watched from a building across the street, scanning the crowd for threats. He spotted the shooter at 9:47 p.m. A man in a gray jacket, moving too purposefully through the crowd, his hand reaching inside his coat. Elias was already moving before the gun cleared the holster. The shot came as Elias tackled the man from behind. It went wide, shattering a window. Screams erupted. Security rushed Maya away. And Elias found himself on the ground, fighting for control of a weapon, with sirens approaching and chaos everywhere. He won. Barely. The shooter was subdued. The evidence was secured. Federal agents, alerted by Elias's journalist contact, arrived within minutes. And when the dust settled, Maya was alive. The cartel was exposed. And Elias Vance, a hitman with 11 years of blood on his hands, was in federal custody, facing questions he couldn't answer. The trial took 7 months. Elias cooperated fully, providing testimony that brought down operations on 3 continents. In exchange for his cooperation, he received a reduced sentence and witness protection upon release. Maya testified too, though she didn't have to. She chose to. She told the court about her brother, about the man who had saved him, about the impossible situation that had forced impossible choices. When the prosecutor asked if she still loved Elias, she didn't hesitate. Yes. God help me, but yes. The final twist came on the last day of the trial. The defense attorney called one final witness. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and silver hair. She walked to the stand, was sworn in, and identified herself as Director Helen Cross of a federal task force that had been investigating the cartel for 6 years. Mr. Vance was not operating alone, she said. He was an asset. Recruited 4 years ago after we identified him as a potential informant. Every contract he completed during that period was done with our knowledge. His actions regarding Daniel Reyes were part of a larger operation designed to expose the recording and bring it into federal hands. The courtroom exploded. Maya stared at Elias. He stared back. He hadn't known. Or maybe part of him had known, had suspected, but never confirmed. Maybe it was easier to believe he was just a monster who found redemption. But the truth was more complicated. He'd been manipulated. Used. Pointed at targets and told to pull the trigger without ever understanding who was really giving the orders. After the verdict, after the sentencing, after the chaos subsided, Maya visited him one final time before he entered protection. They sat across from each other in a gray room with fluorescent lights and guards outside the door. "Did you know?" she asked. "About the task force. About being an asset." "No." "Would it have changed anything if you did?" He thought about the question. About the moment on that rooftop when he first saw her through the scope. About the coffee shop conversations. About the night he held her while she mourned. About every choice he made that led them here. "I would have found you anyway," he said. "Some things are inevitable." She reached across the table and took his hand. "When you get out, find me. They'll give me a new name. A new city. I won't be Elias anymore. Then tell me where. Tell me who to look for. I don't care about the name. I care about the person." He squeezed her hand. 3 years. That's the minimum before they'll allow outside contact. 3 years is a long time. Maya smiled, and there was hope in it. The same hope he'd seen on the rooftop in Queens, against all odds, against all reason. "I've waited my whole life for someone who would burn the world down to protect me. 3 years is nothing." She let go of his hand and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. "The city where you end up. Whatever name they give you. There's going to be a coffee shop somewhere nearby. Find one with a table by the window. Leave an empty chair. And I'll find you." She left. The door closed. And Elias sat in the silence, thinking about a future he never believed he could have. 3 years and 4 months later, in a coastal town in Oregon that rarely saw tourists, a man who called himself Jack Mercer walked into a small coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning. He ordered a black coffee and sat at the table by the window. He left the chair across from him empty. He came back the next day. And the next. On the 8th day, the door opened and a woman walked in. Dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Eyes that had seen too much but still looked for the light. She spotted him immediately. She crossed the room without hesitation. She sat in the empty chair. "This seat taken?" she asked. He smiled. For the first time in 3 years and 4 months, he smiled like he meant it. "I've been saving it for you. Now I need to hear from you. What do you think happens next for Elias and Maya? Do they get the peaceful ending they fought for? Does his past come back to haunt them? Or does she discover one more secret that changes everything again? Drop your answer in the comments below. And tell me what story you want me to tell next. Should I dive into the undercover agent who married into a crime family and forgot which identity was real? Or maybe the bodyguard who fell in love with the woman he was protecting only to learn she was playing him from day one? Subscribe right now so you don't miss either of those stories. And remember, in a world full of shadows, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let someone see your light.